our next speaker, and he has 34 years in the oilfield service industry involving marine salvage, emergency response management, commercial vessel compliance in accordance with U.S. and international laws. His last 13 years focused primarily on well containment, well control, and offshore emergency response and prevention, working with wild well control and currently with Anadarko Petroleum Corporation as an HSE advisor. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineer from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, retiring in 2005 as commander. So without further ado, Mike.
I'm going to go ahead and start off my talk building on what Mike was talking about on the Nexus. I've got a quick video here. Let's go ahead and start. You'll see some of the folks that are in the audience speaking today that are actually part of this video.
Well, the Coast Guard, as well as Bessie, recognizing Anadarko's large stake in this process, came to us about a year and a half ago and asked us if we would like to volunteer to be the role play for the Nexus exercise. And we sat down and talked to him and said, yeah, it sounds like a pretty good idea.
This is just one example of the several of activities that take place in the world of oil spill planning, preparedness, and response.
It's important for the exercise planning team to help us put together this exercise. So we have players, that's two.
The value of today's tabletop exercise is getting back to basics, working closely with industry, with other federal and state partners to ensure that we have the proper tools to fulfill the requirements of the Nexus agreement.
I can't emphasize enough that this is a joint effort, again, by federal, state, local government, as well as industry.
So it's very important that these opportunities exist so we can talk about having a like or a similar understanding of what's important, what response technologies are the best benefit for those resources, and really how would we want to manage the response to do what we call cause no more harm than good.
Our team is going to want to go fix the problems as soon as something happens or if something does happen, and we hope it won't. But in the event that it does, they're going to be anxious to go out there and solve that problem. You have to know the lay of the land, the political landscape, to really understand how to best influence a successful outcome to solving that problem.
The content of the presentation in general will go through the constitutional lending.
And so this particular, the Nexus Gulf Plan and the workshops that were held up to this point, where we planned for, now we're having this tabletop exercise, are valuable in bringing up the issues, the unique issues that would come into play when you bring in all the foreign aspects.
These animals don't recognize borders between the United States and Mexico. They actually cross back and forth. So we, in effect, and in some cases by treaty, share those resources with the other neighbors in the Gulf of Mexico.
Testing your preparedness capability is key to ensuring that the protection of human life, the protection of the environment.
This is the nerve center or the central hub for our exercise today. This is where a lot of the activity for today's drill will take place. About 300 or so folks engaged with this exercise across the company, both here and in Houston. And it's the culmination of about 3 years of work that Anadarko's put in. And there are countless people across the company that have contributed to making this exercise a success.
I think as far as bestowing confidence, I think transparency is the #1 thing that we're all trying to do right now. And when we get together with exercises like this, we get to know each other, we get to feel more comfortable around each other, and hopefully that'll open up our communications amongst each other.
The benefit and the value of this interaction is the months of the planning that goes into it.
We all need each other to make this work, and without one of those stakeholders being present, we couldn't make it work.
Saw the video on there. Mike talked a little bit about the importance of the planning, these type of exercise under the Open 90 and the area committees on there. Through our planning process, over the 3 years on it, we worked closely with the Southeast Louisiana Area Committee on there, since it was also government-led exercise, but also brought in the importance of bringing the stakeholders into the process and having input, participation, and I'll get into some of the participants later on that really brought the value on there. This shows just a quick scope on there. We had a tabletop exercise I showed in the video on there that brought some of the I would say the high-level issues to help us design the exercise level. Particularly we had folks from the Mexican government in addition to the usual U.S. participants. One of the biggest challenges for us was, and I believe we were one of the first operators to really start that far ahead. We actually used our annual exercise in October and started on day 10. So obviously there's a lot of planning ahead of time, and the value of trying starting that far ahead, we really wanted to look at actually capping and shutting in the well. Most of the exercises we're looking at mobilizing, bringing equipment. It really forced us to bring it, I'd say, to another level where we're actually looking to the technical part and the complexities when you're trying to shut in a well. We had equipment deployment exercise again, working with the area committees. Back in February, we identified 2 geographic response areas where we used MSRC and CGA on there and helped improve some of the those areas to help improve some of that, and it culminated into a 2-day exercise over in Shriver, Louisiana, where we used the BP HOLC facility, the Home Offshore Learning Center there, which was used during Deepwater Horizon, and we went ahead and furthered that same scenario to day 13 and day 14. Mike showed that a little bit earlier. Again, a worst case discharge was 206,000 barrels per day, API 33. And location on there, since it was a Mexis exercise, it was about 25, 30 miles from international waters. We fortunately had to use fake weather in order to force it into Mexican waters. Most of it, and you'll see traditionally on the motion trajectories, is usually going to be flowing northern toward the U.S., but we wanted to try to include really looking at the offshore issues. The other reason looking at day 10 and 13 is, and again, it's not to minimize the importance of having offshore or onshore impact areas, which we've looked at most of our exercises in the past, but we're going to focus a lot on the offshore. API and Bessie's invest a lot of research, and the Coast Guard a lot of research in looking at offshore response. We really wanted to focus a lot of those areas, see what we could do to improve those areas, and including look at some of the ecosystems and the sensitive habitat that would be overlooked because we're focused on the offshore part of it. Some of our shared priorities, again, through the planning process, something that both the Coast Guard, Bessie, NOAA was a heavy part of it, with Paige Doling and Charlie participated. Guidance at times. We had the state of Louisiana's key points. But with NOAA, we also made sure we had U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the National Resource Trustees. We brought some of our priorities you see above here. That big part of it was also Coast Guard. Granted, we also use the exercise to gain our experience, but also the Coast Guard also has a big part that used that to get the ICS qualifications for a lot of their folks. The big thing is we wanted to also challenge and grow and learn, improve our level of readiness. We didn't really want it to do as a check mark for compliance out there, but there are times there's a lot of national level issues that we really wanted to bring a test not only for ourselves, but also representing along with industry and the government was looking at. Obviously you're looking at your spill response organization, effective incident management. A lot of it was focused on working with NOAA and integrating our common operating picture where we're sharing data. There's a notice to leases that were required on there to, have a common operating picture, basically a central focal point for the federal on-scene coordinator to have all the data in one area to be able to make decisions as well as the rest of the unified command. So that process, we were able to not only push and pull data on there, but that's important on because during if we had a worst case discharge or a national level event, we need to have that information on there. The other part was bringing on data management, sharing the data on there, particularly bringing in natural resource damage assessment or NERDA process in there where NOAA brought 12, 13 people in there, including folks from the NERDA folks on there were, at least what our position was, granted you're going to run the legal parts and NERDA's going to go in another direction, but making sure up front that, we'll be efficient in a number of, we've had a data management plan where we use working with NOAA as putting as a priorities, but we dovetail some of our information on. We're dedicating resources, and that data's shared with the resource trustees ahead of time, so there's not any secrets in knowing, if we have an impact to a certain area, there's a certain testing, so what labs are going to, so we're all having apples and apples rather than having to repeat it several times and being inefficient. It's definitely a big party over there that we had over in Schriever. We try to replicate what would be real-time response. Our source control was over in the Woodlands, where a lot of the oil companies would have, where most of their reservoir engineers and their drilling engineers locate because of the data and information that's available. But our main instant command post was over in Schriever on there. We had well over 300 people, it said, by adding on that, and we even had challenges during our planning process that I had a lot of people wanted participate, but due to safety reasons, we could only fill so many people in rooms, and we didn't want to overcrowd it. And I really want to emphasize this point enough on there. A lot of my slides are going to show this, but it's the collaborative effort on there. Granted, as an RP, we have in our plans, we will commit to bringing the right resources with MSRC, CGA. We happen to be members of Marine Well Containment Consortium. But the Coast Guard and the federal agencies are going to bring folks. We had an EPA representative from Region 6. The Coast Guard, you see, brought the strike team and some other units. Department of Interior, Port Bessie, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. NOAA brought a lot of folks. Department of State was also a remote participation. Mexico showed up with about 4 or 5 folks. So bring a lot of collaborative effort. The state of Louisiana, Alaska, and DEQ. And a lot of these folks that really helped out in the planning process with the planning team was also putting in an index for folks to test and taking a real-time experience or lesson learned, whether from Deepwater Horizon or learnings that came from the area committees on there. We want some real-time challenges to really test the folks on there. Wasn't trying to trick them, but in order to have them test and respond to things that be realistic on there, including, again, having the natural resource trustees. Matter of fact, one of the things that we want to emphasize, I mentioned earlier about the offshore entity part of it, we were able to test for the first time is, being that you saw the location where the well is about 200 miles offshore, is the recovery and rehabilitation of wildlife. Whether you're catching sea mammals, whether it's turtles, reptiles, or dolphins, or birds on there, we realized that the likelihood based on lesson learned, we had Ron and Murgatoy assist that with us, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the state natural resource trustees. They said, what are we going to do if we collect them offshore? If we wait until that 200 miles, which could be 24 to 48 hours in there, the likelihood of survivability is probably going to be on the lower side. So what we did, we actually developed plans where actually we figure out we're putting on some of those rehab modules, put them on offshore supply vessels, so when they capture them on board, they start the rehab process. So as they transited to shore, we think the likelihood, based on the input we got from the trustees, that we had our likelihood of survivability. We thought that was brought us some lesson learned from Deepwater Horizon. Some of the industry participants, I don't know an operator out there, I know Chevron's, I don't mean to speak for themselves, but us being a larger independent on it, we depend on it. I mentioned it, MWCC, MSRC, and CGA. You had Wild Well Controls, or well control company, Trendsetter, who did a lot of the simulations, but have a lot of vendors coming in, helping us out, the response group helping out with our IAP. But one of the big things we were able to do, because of the size on there, we had a limit on, we would have liked to have had more industry folks participating, but we still had 20 to 30 industry folks participating as controllers and evaluators, and we're fortunate to have Tom Kuba, one of the speakers, He's a subject matter expert in subsea dispersants and dispersants overall. He was able to come in as a player to help us in our environmental unit with dispersants. We also had Sam Walker for BP, a subject matter expert on dispersant, but also on sampling, and helped out with our sampling plans. You see, we also had Chevron, Exxon, and BP also assisted with us. Flow of the exercise, it just shows, again, we had 2 different places. It is coordinating basically injects. We had over 300 injects per day, trying to coordinate with different areas on there that made it a challenge. Some of the biggest accomplishments, I know jumped ahead a little bit, talk about the offshore recovery and rehab plans, the sampling plans, more than just looking at dispersants monitoring and sampling at the source, but it's also realizing that as the oil and the trajectories move in the areas, it's collecting sampling as you're going on, but having a coordinated effort between the RP, dedicating the resources where they're not competing with the agencies, but also under the unified command, having plan and resources out there where you're collecting some of the data and sharing it. We're also able to successfully go through a cap and flow process where we took a perfectly good well. We actually had to redesign it for the exercise to meet their objectives. But all of our wells are designed to actually cap and shut in, but we wanted to test the cap and flow because, we talked about it on day 13 and 14, and we realized, we'd have to dedicate, 29 different vessels out there to do that type of operations, and we went through a full shut-in process where we actually had simulator where we had underwater videos showing the pressure temperatures on the wells on there. We had our flow engineer and capping folks doing analysis and stuff going through that process. Accomplishments, again, using the BPHLC, great facility. I mentioned about the COP. Mentioned again the excellent support that we have from a lot of folks. Our challenge in learning, communicating between 2 centered communications, always one of the biggest lessons learned. We try to continue improving. We had an opportunity that we didn't do for our most exercise, and that's probably one of the biggest things in RP when you dedicate yourself to or commit yourself to one of the exercises. It's really having the access to and working with federal agencies and resources you don't normally have to do with. During our normal exercise, you may or may not get an FOSC, may get a state rep, but during the exercise, we had a BESI source control coordinator with Mike Pendergrass. We had the Coast Guard PIAT team, the Coast Guard strike team. We had a representative from the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, one of the project managers helping us out with there, but having a lot of those folks available, having NOAA with the NERDA folks and having 13 people in SSC, having EPA, OSC in one exercise. Again, there's a great value that you don't normally get a chance to, and to definitely try to simulate what you do in real time. The dispersant management, one of the other big challenges, you realize again when you're trying to split the baby where you got surface dispersants and subsea dispersants. During with that discharge by day 10, day 13, we were burning about, 80,000 to 100,000 gallons a day on there, and you're trying to bring from a lot of different folks. We're a member of OSRL's global inventory, but also by day 10 and 13, you're also ramping up manufacturing. So you bring a lot of complexities in that, and it's still an ongoing thing. Working the JIC model. Most of it is an RP. When you're working public affairs, you really don't get a chance to work in a JIC where we're putting our public affairs we normally do in real time and sending it out, but working in a joint information center. So looking at the EZ and what would be allowed and not allowed to do, in the Mexican EEZ area, there really wasn't a big difference between on the U.S. side, to be honest with you. Basically, we show up with resources we're able to do in situ burning dispersants on it. They didn't object, but they didn't approve either. And that was kind of a learning in itself. It becomes more of a sticky point on the Mexico side if you get into territorial sea within the 12 miles. So anyway, I think I kept it in my time.
Yeah, you sure did. Thank you.